Late-stage subprime delinquencies rising. Auto loan delinquencies show the highest increase across all loan products, and average balances remain elevated for the sixth straight month. I'm Jeff Richardson, host of Credit Gauge Live, your source for the most timely and comprehensive information on consumer credit health. And I'm joined, as always, by our lead analysts, Susan Fay and Atif Mirza. Let's not waste any time. Let's get right to the questions. Atif, late-stage delinquencies, that's the stage right before a consumer's in default. What are we seeing in that category?
Thank you, Jeff. So according to VantageScore Credit Gauge month of June, both mid-stage and late-stage delinquencies rose year over year and month over month. However, what's concerning is the VantageScore subprime segment, where delinquencies rose from 2% to 2.5%, which is quite a sharp increase year over year, which tells us that there is a real repayment stress among these riskier borrowers.
Interesting, Atif. Susan, over to you. Auto loan delinquencies on the rise. Can you speak to that trend?
Thank you, Jeff. In June 2025, the VantageScore credit gauge data shows that auto loan delinquencies increased the most compared to all other products. And this is true both month over month and year over year. In early stage delinquencies for auto loans, the delinquency rate was at 2.25%, which is the highest it's been in the last 4 months. Car prices in general have continued to climb, and interest rates remain elevated. So that results in a higher monthly payment for consumers than they faced even a few years ago. And so when we look at the debt obligations for a household, consumers typically prioritize their car payments. And so to see early stage delinquencies increasing is definitely an area for concern.
That is concerning, Susan. Atif, over to you. Let's dig into balances. We're seeing balances rise?
Balances are still running high. We are at 6 months in a row, 5-year high. According to VantageScore Credit Gauge, in June, balances were $106,100, which is a $1,300 increase from last year. However, what's interesting is that the balance to loan ratio continued to decline, and it's at 50.78% in June, which tells us even though consumers are carrying higher balances, they are pretty cautious about using their credit.
Some good news there, but also some concerns around the delinquency rates rising. Susan, Atif, thank you. As always, you can get much more analysis on consumer credit health at VantageScore.com. Next up, we have a very special and very timely guest. With VantageScore making headlines nearly every day this month of July due to the announcement from FHFA that effective immediately, VantageScore 4.0 can be used for GSE-funded mortgage loans. We have an expert on these matters who will join us. Welcome back to Credit Gauge Live. I'm very pleased to be joined by our special guest this month, Armine Karajyan, and she is a senior director at KBRA, and she specializes in the residential mortgage-backed security market. And what an interesting time to have you here, coming fresh off the announcement from FHFA regarding the use of VantageScore 4.0 in GSE-funded mortgages. Armine, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, happy to be here.
Let's start with the broader outlook. What is the outlook for you over the next 12 months regarding the mortgage market?
We're expecting modest increase in mortgage originations towards the end of 2025, beginning of 2026, moving roughly 10%, I would say, year over year for each of those years, from 1.8 to 2 trillion and from 2 to 2.2 trillion for the overall mortgage originations, as we expect the rate cuts, potentially rates hovering in mid to high sixes, maybe going into low sixes in the mid 2026. That also positively affects the private label securitization market, also known as PLS, where we are projecting about 20% increase, going into about $125 billion towards the end of the 2025. Maybe tracking to be the highest issuance year post-global financial crisis even.
So some positive outlook there. Let's dig into the specifics regarding what FHFA just announced. Why do you think this is such a big deal?
As we mentioned in our commentary that we released, I think a couple of weeks ago at this point, we think this is a huge move for PLS and overall market in general, because this will be a historic move by the GSEs to, for the first time, ingest something other than the single source classic FICO score. I think this move is obviously rooted in trying to address the housing crisis with trying to lower the cost of lending and also potentially broaden the access to credit, which seems to align with what we're seeing when we analyze the VS4 data.
So what stands apart when you think about VantageScore 4.0, the model?
So there are several key differences in VS4 versus classic FICO, which is what we currently ingest and the rest of the stakeholders do as well. One, it's trended data, so more current borrower performance. Two, it's potentially able to ingest more thin file borrowers, and potentially also it excludes some of the older, more irrelevant debt potentially, and include some more relevant debts like rental payments. So when this data was originally last year, in July of last year, released by the GSEs, hundreds of thousands of data points, we've ingested it and we have essentially concluded that what we're seeing is that in the mid ranges of scoring, VS4 is slightly higher. Then we have also observed that we're seeing some previously unscored data points being actually able to receive some scoring. And then lastly, it does seem to track similarly to classic FICO. FICO 10T could be a closer comparison to VS4. However, that data has not been released and we haven't been able to produce any studies on that.
How does that carry through to investors?
As with anything new and unknown for investors, there might be some expectation of questioning from them as to how the models will be calibrated and how the regressions will be performed. But I think the good news is the private label securitization market has been known to be agile and in my opinion, will eventually adapt, as well as GSEs have been very good about sharing their information and data. So over time, there might be a successful ingestion of all this new information.
Last question for you. What do you anticipate in terms of structural shifts in purchase versus refinance market, again, sort of projecting over the next 12 months?
We don't expect to see a huge shift, I would say. I think we're still looking at primarily purchase-driven market. Even if the interest rates hit low sixes, by the mid-2026, I think we may see a mild increase in refi, maybe a refi bump, but it will be nothing like the refi wave we have seen in previous years.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really interesting insights, Armine. Thank you for being here, particularly on a week fresh off all of the news regarding FHFA and VantageScore 4.0. As a reminder, you can always review the VantageScore credit gauge analysis online at VantageScore.com or use the tool. We'll be back next month with all of the latest credit gauge live trends and information. Until then, thanks for joining us.